ॐ नमः श्रीयतिराजाय विवेकानन्दसूरये सच्चित्सुखस्वरूपाय स्वामिने तापहारिणे। In our previous class, we were discussing about the verses from the Kurma Purana, which as it were gives us a summary of what was discussed in Raj Yoga or Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. So Swamiji has done a free translation of those verses just to, at the appendix, at the end of the introduction on Raj Yoga, before he starts his commentary on the different sutras of Patanjali. So last time we discussed up to Yama and Niyama, what Yama and Niyama is. Then we come to Asana. Now, even Kurma Purana says that the only thing to understand about asana, most of us know there are so many asanas described, or which have become so much popular these days in the practice of yoga. So everybody seems to be very keen to practice these asanas as part of the yoga. No doubt it has its own place, but it seems that asanas and to some extent pranayama, out of the 8 steps of yoga, Patanjali's yoga, these two asanas and pranayama, or asanas mainly, have become very important for most of yoga practitioners, because it helps most of the practitioners to keep their body in proper shape. That's the only utility they want from the practice of yoga. Though yoga is, the asana portion of yoga is just meant to give a certain kind of steadiness to the prana, and as a result it steadies the mind as well. The main function of Patanjali's yoga, or the asana in Patanjali's yoga, is to give a steadiness to the mind. It has very little to do with the body, if at all. So anyway, now that is what normally taken for granted when you say yoga, or Patanjali's yoga, or yogasanas come to the forefront. So that is why this Kurma Purana tells us the only thing, the translation I am giving you now, so as translated by Swamiji. Swamiji says, the only thing to understand about asana is leaving the body free, holding the chest, the shoulders and the head straight. Now this is the only function of yoga according to the Kurma Purana. So that validates what Swamiji said in his discussion of asanas, when he said the only thing that perhaps asana should do for a yoga practitioner is to about it one has to learn whatever one has to learn about yoga. Yogasanas will be considered complete if one can leave the body, or one can allow the body to be free. Free in the sense the chest, the shoulders and the head, they are in one line. If that is attained, any asana which helps you to do that is sufficient according to the Kurma Purana. If that is achieved, then the goal of asana in Patanjali Yoga Sutras is attained. So that is what the Kurma Purana says. So they don't discuss anything other than the function of asana, whether it is Sukhasana or any other asana. The asana normally which we use for sitting, when we sit in meditation, the Padmasana or the Sukhasana or any other asana, which helps us to uh, keep our body, keep our body, the chest, the shoulders, and the head straight. If that is achieved, according to Kurma Purana, the purpose of asana is served. So there is very little to learn beyond this in the asana section. That's why quickly the Kurma Purana jumps to the topic of pranayama. Now, about pranayama, it has given a few hints about which Swamiji also has spoken. We saw when we discussed the asana portion, the pranayama portion, what are the essential pranayamas which Swamiji has recommended to as safe to be practiced by anyone, irrespective of its guru or anybody. One can, just by reading these books or reading Raj Yoga, one can practice that. The only pranayama or the only two pranayamas which Swamiji gave, other than inhaling and exhaling rhythmically, the only two pranayamas which Swamiji recommended has been explained here in the Kurma Purana. First, Kurma Purana in one verse tries to explain what prana means. Now, prana means the vital forces in one's own body. Ayama means controlling them. To control prana is pranayama. So pranayama has been divided into split into two words, the prana and ayama. So prana is the vital forces, as I said, prana, apana, samana, vyana and udana. Basically, all our life forces have been divided into 5 vital forces. They are associated with life. And these 5 vital forces further have been used to explain the different bodily functions, that which serves as an engine to the entire body. The body has many functions to perform, and the body has to be kept in proper shape, or should have a level of fitness which enables the body and the prana to attain higher states of existences. That is, enables a human personality to live in the higher planes of one's personality, to live more in the higher planes, the Manomaya Kosha, the Vijnanamaya Kosha, and the Anandamaya Kosha. That is the goal of pranayama as well as asanas. The lower 4 steps, yama, niyama, asana, and pranayama, are designed in such a way that it frees you from being bothered about the ailments or the problems associated with a wrongly cultivated prana on the body. As I told you, the Annamaya Kosha is definitely affected by the Pranamaya Kosha, or the 5 pranas which enliven it, which makes it work, which conducts its various functions in society, in our surroundings. Whenever we interact with our surroundings, we use our gross body, which has been powered by the 5 pranas of which are part of our gross body, as well as part of a small part of it forms a small part of a subtle body as well, because it is the link, it is the prana which decides how our mind functions at the same time. It's not that prana has influence only on our body or the Annamaya Kosha. It has influence on the way the mind behaves, which is part of the subtle body. So it is like a sandwich between the gross body and the subtle body, and it affects both. That is why it is known as the vital body. the vital forces. They are vital because of its effect on the two levels of personality which human beings are constituted of. We are constituted of 5 levels of being, 5 sheaths as has been described in the Upanishads and Vedanta. And the lower two, Annamaya Kosha and the Pranamaya Kosha, together forms a very strong vehicle for evolving into a higher and higher personality, or evolving into a higher human being. That is the essence of yoga. When you study the impact of the vital forces, the impact of prana on the body, you have to also consider that the prana, if it is disturbed, has an effect on the mind also, because it is the one which connects them both. So you can't take care of the body and forget about the mind, as most of the yoga practitioners do. They don't bother about cultivating or training the mind or controlling the mind at the expense of keeping their body in fit shape. They use the entire prana to make the body fit. Though it is a function of the prana to see that the body is fit, but its only role is as far as the body is fit enough to carry out our daily functions. Beyond that, every bit of prana that we use, extra prana which we use in maintaining our body, is that much prana will be less for maintaining or controlling our mind. So the quantity of prana that is available to us, which depends on the various factors, the food that we eat, the thoughts that we think, whatever ahara, that's why pratyahara is discussed afterwards, to help us to control not only the prana but also our organs, our body, so that there is minimum wastage, and whatever prana is available is equally distributed not only all over the body so that it remains healthy. Some of the prana should be available for higher functions, for developing our intellect, for strengthening our mind, for controlling our mind. So this is an important aspect of prana which we forget. And we think the only role of prana is to keep the body, especially those who believe in the wonderful effect pranayama has on the body. No doubt it is very important. But the amount of prana that we normally spend on the body far exceeds the spare prana which should have been used in the cultivation of the mind. That is the essential point which is being made here in the Kurma Purana. That's why they say prana, vital forces in one body, ayama means controlling them, controlling the vital forces. And as I said, its role is not just to control the body but also the mind. Now, for example, if a lot of prana is used, suppose we eat, one of the pranas is to digest the food that we eat. One of the pranas is used in our breath. So no doubt that is very essential. Our heartbeat, our breathing, the power of the lungs to breathe in fresh oxygen and throw out the carbon dioxide, the waste gases from the body, and the different functions of the body are continuously using some prana. But suppose we have no control over these functions and we overeat, or we over-exercise, or we do anything in excess, that much of extra prana has to be sacrificed by the mind and it will be used for the maintenance of the body. Suppose a person eats a lot of food. Now, a lot of prana will be used, whether he likes it or not, to digest whatever has been put in. If we eat only that much, which our the prana vayu can handle. The samana, prana, vyana, samana, udana, and all those pranas are there. The samana vayu is supposed to be taking care of the digestion. So the samana vayu, if it is used in excess and takes a majority of the time trying to digest the food that we consume, or if we are in the habit of eating always, then at least till the food is digested or till the food is assimilated in the body, the amount of calories that we require is very less. But if anything more than what is required for the body, that means so much of prana is being wasted or engaged in digesting the food that we have consumed, because it cannot be simply thrown out. Something has to be done. Either it will accumulate as fat or it will help you. In some cases it might help you. Bodybuilders and athletes and all, they have to take, but they burn away that calories, so they require a lot of input. So in their case it's okay if their main function is to keep the body fit for their athletics or their different sports, they have to consume more. But if you are leading a sedentary life and you consume more than what is necessary, then invariably you end up using a lot of prana to digest your food. So that is why the restraint that we are supposed to have, not only on eating, but the other inputs, the other things which require different pranas to function, if we do it in excess, that is why in the Gita and even Buddha, in Buddhism, moderation is asked. Don't eat too much, don't sleep too much, don't be very active, don't be too much active. So any excess on the body is not good. A proper balance of the diet, a proper balance of the work that you do, a proper balance of the rest, proper balance or a proper proportion of sleep, a proper proportion of everything. In general, the Gita says about a yoga is nothing but leading a regulated life. So too much of eating is bad, too little eating is also bad, because so much prana, if if you eat less than what your body requires, then it becomes difficult for the mind. That has been shown in the Upanishads also. If you fast too much, then the mind does not function properly. So one needs food, but beyond a certain limit, it is a wastage of prana. So there are three sorts of pranayama according to Kurma Purana. The very simple, the middle, and the very high. So depending on the stage of yoga we are in, depending on the purpose of yoga in our lives, the type of pranayama prescribed for us is different. One is the very simple, the middle, and the very high. Then, according to Kurma Purana, there are three steps which Swamiji has explained. Pranayama is divided into three parts. Filling in the air in the lungs, because as Swamiji discussed, it is prana which empowers all the other pranas, the other life forces, four life forces, samana, vyana, udana, and all those things. So that is powered by this main prana or mukhya prana, which is known as breath. So Swamiji Kurma Purana says that filling in of air is the first part of pranayama. Restraining or retaining that air in the lungs, not allowing it to come out immediately, is restraining. Puraka is the filling. Kumbhaka and the Rechaka. Kumbhaka is to keep it inside, and Rechaka is to breathe out, emptying the lungs of the foul air or the impure air. So these are the three parts of pranayama, of each pranayama. And the lowest pranayama, when you begin with 12 seconds, according to Kurma Purana, when you begin with 12 seconds, it is the lowest pranayama. When you begin with 24 seconds, it is the middle pranayama. And that pranayama is the best, with begins with 36 seconds. So the slower the breathing, the more powerful or the higher the level of pranayama that you practice. It all depends on the capacity of the lungs, according to Kurma Purana, that decides what type of pranayama you can do. In the lowest kind of pranayama, there is perspiration. You, at the most, if you do regular pranayama of the lowest, that is 12 seconds, when you begin with 12 seconds, breathe in for 12 seconds, then you have, maybe if you do it, the effect of prana on the body is seen, and you, even in a cold climate, you start perspiring if you have done it properly. So the lowest kind of pranayama is the one in which you perspire, but beyond that, there is no bodily sign. In the medium kind, that is with 24 seconds, there is quivering of the body. Quivering is a sensation which you feel when you breathe in for a long time, hold for a long time, and then breathe out for a long time. The steadiness gives rise to a slight quiver in the body. Those who practice pranayama, they can get that feeling. These are meant for specialists, so one has to be very careful and not. These are just mentioned here in Kurma Purana, assuming that the Guru is there who can guide the pranayama process. Without that, as Swamiji has warned us, it can be dangerous, except the lower pranayama. So the middle pranayama gives a little quivering of the body, and the highest pranayama helps you to make the body so light, and it gives you a feeling of great bliss. That's what they say. If you can do it for 34 seconds, 36 seconds, which is higher than the middle one, you feel a strange kind of lightness. The heaviness of the body goes away. And the prana enables you to feel so light that you feel as if a big load has gone away from you. The feeling that you are the body for the time being goes away. And you feel so light that the feeling of lightness in the body itself, people know those who feel very light, and they have a tendency to feel very fit. If you eat too much, you feel lazy, you feel a bit heavy, you want to sit down. You just can't run after you have taken a very heavy meal. That's why people, when they engage themselves in a lot of physical work, they prefer not to eat too much. They may eat when they want to rest later on at night, but during the day they have a light meal so that they feel light, and a lot of enthusiasm and bliss is there associated with this lightness of the body, which is a result of pranayama. If one is breathing, and this pranayama can be achieved even without consciously practicing it for 12 seconds or 24 seconds or even 36 seconds, by the practice of japa. Japa is a tool which enables you to practice this pranayama without consciously attempting to do it, because when you focus on the japa or the mantra, you will find that as you increase your concentration, as you increase the japa, the amount of japa you can do at a stretch, you will find that slowly the breathing becomes slow. It is an unconscious process, but it results in pranayama all the same. And when that happens, when the pranayama becomes normal or a part of your personality because of regular practice of japa, you don't have to do it separately. This you can find these teachings, you can find in the gospel, and also many disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, the direct disciples, who advised people against practicing pranayama. If they did their japa regularly, systematically. It's just like doing pranayama. And because when you do japa, there is a certain kind of regulation in the breathing process which takes place automatically. You don't have to make an effort to do that. And the more intense you meditate, the slower you breathe. It is like the angler. Thakur used to give the wonderful example. Sri Ramakrishna used to give the example of an angler who is catching fish. So when he is catching fish, everything becomes still for him. When he is just waiting to feel the tug on the line which he has immersed with there is a hook to which some kind of food is attached, some kind of uh, food which tempts the fish to come for that small piece of uh, food that is there, and then in the process its mouth gets stuck in the hook. So before the angler can feel that the fish has been caught, the hook is in the water, but it is not yet attached to any fish. So he is waiting patiently. And the more he focuses and more he concentrates, he is not aware of the surroundings. There may be a lot of things going on around him. But he knows as soon as he feels a tug on the line, he has to immediately pull it so that the fish does not escape. So that gives him a kind of concentration which helps him to unconsciously do a kind of pranayama. So the same process you will find if you do japa. If you do japa with the kind of attention and concentration that an angler does, that's why Thakur gave this example. He said, can you meditate like that angler who meditates, who's so particular? And also other games or sports or tasks which require tremendous amount of concentration. For example, you are passing a small thread through a needle's eye of the needle. How much care you have to. So all these highly skilled things when we do, we focus our whole mind on that. So there is a lot of dharana, a lot of concentration involved. And that results in a unconscious kind of pranayama which takes place when we are focusing. So there is a mantra. Now they come after showing that there are three kinds of pranayama. The Kurma Purana says how the mantra can be used. Especially here, the Gayatri mantra is given as an example because that is a universal mantra. Suppose one is not initiated, normally they advise people to repeat the Gayatri mantra as a preparation. So every brahmachari or every person who is a novice in spiritual life is given the Gayatri mantra in the Hindu tradition in Vedanta because it is a prayer which has a meaning similar to that of our mantra. Till you formally get initiated or get a mantra from a guru, normally one is asked to practice Gayatri mantra, which is a universal prayer, which Kurma Purana also quotes here, and says that it can be used to practice pranayama. So even Kurma Purana confirms that repetition of mantra helps you to regulate your prana, which will help you to practice yoga correctly. So there is a mantra called Gayatri. It's very holy verse of the Vedas. Though it is a verse taken from the Vedas, it is actually a mantra. That's why it is not just said a Gayatri Stotra, but they call it Gayatri Mantra. Though it is a stotra, there are so many stotras. And Gayatri also, Om Bhurbhuvasva Tatsavitur Varenyam Vargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Prachodayatha. So there is a definite meter in which this verse is sung in the Vedas. But it has been taken out from that and given the status of a mantra. So the meaning is, it's a very holy verse of the Vedas. And the meaning is we meditate on the glory of that being who has produced this universe may enlighten our minds. This is the exact meaning of all the mantras that we do in different mantras that are part of our tradition. whether it is a Tantric tradition or a Vedic tradition. The mantras basically have one purpose: to meditate on the glory of the being whom we call as the Ishta. Here in this case, you can use Savitri or you can use Sun, the Sun God. You can use any other god or deity. You meditate on the glory of that being who has produced this universe, because we have to imagine that being Satchidananda, the representation or the symbol of Satchidananda, our Ishta, has the capacity to produce this universe, to create this universe, to create the world that is around us. So the whole creation has come out of Brahman and it merges back into Brahman. The world that we experience is nothing but a creation of the ultimate truth, Sat, Chit and Ananda, on which we meditate in the form of our Ishta. Our Ishta is just the door through which we enter the portals of Satchidananda, and that Satchidananda which is the cause of the universe. So Om Bhur Bhuvaswa Om Tatsavitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimai Dhiyo Yona Pra. May he enlighten our minds. The function of pranayama in this case is not to keep the body fit, but to enlighten our minds. That means to cultivate our minds in such a way that the Manomaya Kosha, we start living in another level of our personality, which is known as Vijnanamaya Kosha. Now this Vijnanamaya Kosha is something which helps you to understand the subtle truths intuitively. There is one way of understanding through the Manomaya Kosha, which is intellectually, and there's another way of understanding the same truth of the scripture, which is using the Buddhi, the Manomaya Kosha. So, the Vijnanamaya Kosha. So, the higher the understanding, the better the yoga that you are doing or the spiritual personality of that person. He lives in the Vijnanamaya Kosha for a long time if he meditates on the meaning of the Gayatri. So we meditate on the glory of that being who has produced, may enlighten our minds. Our minds are functioning, but they are not enlightened right now. That is why this prayer is necessary. Every repetition of the mantra is to take the mind from the Manomaya Kosha level, and at least till when we are meditating, we assume that our buddhi is refined, it is enlightened, and we see things in a proper perspective. The moment we start seeing things in a proper perspective, all our doubts, all our questions are answered. Otherwise, there will be confusion. The intellectual plane, the Manomaya Kosha, has a tendency to take our mind in circles, round and round. One person argues in one way, you get convinced of it, another person comes and of a superior intellect, he comes and tells you something else. So that is how the academic discussions never come to a conclusion. We read in the Gospel that some of those people whom Master Mashay refers to, the Western philosophers, committed suicide because they were thinking so much but ending up nowhere. They were just going round and round in circles, and finally they got frustrated and got a feeling that we have spent our entire life thinking and searching for truth. But unfortunately, they did not do the thing which they should have, to take their minds and try to extend their inquiry to the Vijnanamaya Kosha of the mind, not at the Manomaya Kosha level. Because they get stuck at the Manomaya Kosha level, they went round and round in circles, and their inquiries, their questions were never answered. They apparently got an answer, and when they got the answer, they thought this is the final answer, and they thought it will be a conviction, but some other experience told them that what their mind told them today is telling them something else tomorrow in a different context. Then they follow that, and then there's a never-ending process. That is why tarka or rationality or reason, though it is a very important tool, it prevents you from making silly mistakes. But beyond a certain level, it ceases to enlighten you in matters which are subtle. So the Gayatri Mantra opens the key to your understanding by unlocking the subtler planes or the subtler levels of existences which can be accessed only if one's mind is refined. So the more we start living in the Vijnanamaya Kosha level because of this pranayama or the meditation, the higher pranayama, by combining the repetition of the mantra with the pranayama, then the more clear our understanding, our intuition develops. Then he says, Om is joined to it in the beginning and the end. Om Bhur Bhuvasvaha Tatsavitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimai Dhiyo Yona Prachodayata Om. It begins with the Om and ends with the Om. And then the next repetition takes place. Then we again end with the Om. Then the next repetition. The ending Om and the Om of the succeeding repetition of the mantra are same. So you start with Om, say the mantra, conclude with Om, which begins the next mantra, recitation of the mantra, and then you close with Om. So Om is said before and after the mantra always. In one pranayama, try to repeat 3 Gayatris. Now you can imagine. That is the ideal pranayama, and 36 seconds perhaps it might take, depending on how fast you repeat the Gayatri. So, in one whole pranayama, he is asking you, Kurma Purana asks us to repeat the Gayatri 3 times. And our mantra, which is much smaller, one doesn't know. I mean, it can be 20, 30 repetitions if we do pranayama. So it's not before you repeat your mantra, smaller mantra, 30 times or 40 times. Perhaps you are aware that you have finished one round of breathing or pranayama. The meditation or the repetition of the mantra can become so subtle and so focused that you don't even breathe. You are so much engaged with the repetition of the mantra. If you can repeat 3 Gayatri mantras, see, even if I say repeat it very fast, Om Bhur Bhuvasvaha Tatsavitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat Om. So this is one. So if I repeat it 3 times and then have only one pranayama in the process, that means you can imagine how slow my breathing should be. To complete this repetition thrice, you are supposed to breathe in, hold it, and breathe out only once. When you have completed these 3 repetitions of the Gayatri Mantra, however fast you do, you will find it is so difficult. So, this is what they say. In all the books, they speak of pranaya being divided into Rechaka, rejecting or exhaling, Uraka, inhaling, and Kumbhaka, restraining or stationary. The Indriyas, as I mentioned, these are the 3 stages of each pranayama. The Indriyas, the organ of the senses, are acting outwards and coming in contact with external objects. Bringing them under the control of the will is what is known as pratyahara, or gathering towards oneself. Now, after pranayama, he is starting the Kurma Purana is telling us about the process of pratyahara, which we discussed in the Raj Yoga proper. This is just an appendix which Swamiji has given so that we get a feeling that what has been discussed is part of one of the important Puranas, the Kurma Purana, which has described this Patanjali's yoga in great detail. So, Pratyahara is restraining, bringing them under control of the willpower and gathering towards oneself, not allowing the senses which have a tendency, if left to themselves, our senses, especially our sense organs, in combination with the sense organs, the subtle senses have always a curiosity to interact with the world outside. So that is a normal process. That is how our body is built. Whether we want it or not, It is curiosity that kills the cat. It's very, very clear, absolutely clear, that the more we involve ourselves in things outside, the more we involve ourselves, the more our attention is focused there, the more our senses go out. And the more it goes out, the more it is difficult to restrain. And the less we restrain it, the more we'd have trouble with our own minds, not with others. The trouble which we encounter with others is definitely there. As a result of going out, you interact with people. Sometimes the interaction is pleasurable. Even if it is pleasurable, it involves a lot of expenditure of energy. But if it is not pleasurable, it is results in expenditure of more energy, more prana. The more you get involved in more things, the more you socialize. Socialization is supposed to be, as I told you very often, that was the theme of my talk which I gave in that international seminar, where mind, religion, and interaction, so social studies, or that was the topic with social sciences. So social sciences were designed by human beings, because the definition of sociology, the popular definition of sociology, that man is a social animal. Now, man is a social animal means human beings have taken for granted that we are a little better than animals, not much. And if we want to be better animals, then we have to be social animals. And then society will regulate us, unlike animals, which normally don't follow. Even they have their own regulations. Animals are also social. But man is supposed to be a more evolved social animal, so he cannot do things as shamelessly as animals do. So that's why we call ourselves cultured. Culture means that we are social animals. So that is the crudest way of saying that we are basically animal by nature, because we share the same Annamaya Kosha and the Pranamaya Kosha with these animals. So if we behave in a little dignified way with the social institutions of family, marriage, and all those things, then we are considered to be more organized, more disciplined, and more evolved than these animals. That is the only superiority, perhaps, apart from a little academic or the little more capacity of the mind. We are practically happy to consider ourselves as social animals. But yoga doesn't agree with that. They say there are two more aspects of your personality beyond the Manomaya Kosha, the Vijnanamaya Kosha and Anandamaya Kosha, which you have to explore. If you want to know what your true personality is, you just can't be happy with being called a social animal. If you just obey the legitimate rules of social behavior, which social sciences attempt to do, and consider yourself to be a highly evolved being, Vedanta or yoga says you are not evolved at all. You have not even started your evolution. You're just a better animal, or you are a social animal, as the sociologists would like to classify us. So sociologists have made certain rules. There are so many social sciences which talk about our duties, our rights, and at every stage of our life we have to be policed by the law or by the police to see that we don't transgress upon others' social rights or the others' rights, just as animals do. There's in animals it is a free play of power. The power might is right. Of course, it is true in the case of human beings also, who are not evolved, who are closer to animals than human beings. But might is right there for survival of the fittest. That's why Swamiji criticized Darwin's theory when he said evolution means that is based on the principle of survival of the fittest. He said, yes, survival of the fittest as long as you are happy to remain as an animal. If you call yourself a social animal and compete with animals, then it is survival of the fittest. You have to outdo the animals, you have to outdo the plants, you have to outdo the rest of the creation to survive on this planet. And that is what all the social sciences aim at. They just want you to see that you win the war. It doesn't matter if you destroy the environment around you, as long as you survive. And mistakenly, this has been the norm for human beings. This has guided us. That as long as we are legitimate, we are within our legal bounds, it does not matter if we kill animals, it does not matter if we kill plants, if we destroy the environment, as long as we survive. But then that theory does not work. The social sciences have proven to be incompetent to keep or to maintain a ecological order. Nature has, or Prakriti has its own way of telling human beings that no, this greediness has to go. Otherwise, you see what is happening now. A small virus can disturb the entire social order. It can bring out the animal in man now. If there are too less resources, if we believe that it is survival of the fittest, then we have to compete with these viruses. The viruses also have a right to survive. They say we will survive even if it means destroying you. We get into your body, we evolve, we mutate, and we have an instinct for survival. And if you don't allow us to survive and coexist peacefully, we will find out our own ways and destroy you. Why should they? They are also in this race. If we are merely social animals, and if we are competing with other animals, then there is a level playing field. Prakriti sees to it that they also get their own opportunities. There cannot be in the jungle also, if you find the lion may think it is the ruler of the whole, it's the king of the forest. But that is not true. There are certain animals who can come together and see that he does not misuse his power. The balance is perfectly maintained even in the animal world. One cannot just abuse one's power and behave as he wants and become greedy. Then their nature has its own way of controlling or maintaining this order in the universe. So if we are mere social animals, then these rules, the social sciences, which aim at making humankind or making mankind happy or more powerful than its other animals and the plants. But there is a limit to that. That theory, Swamiji said, cannot hold true when we evolve into higher human beings. There it is not survival of the fittest, but you will find that the more the people renounce, the more they give up this gross, the more healthy or the more better the society becomes. It is because of Jesus' sacrifice. It is because of the saints who taught unselfishness, taught us to give up greed. All the scriptures shout again and again the same tune, the same voice, which comes in the form of different incarnations and prophets. They say that you this way you can't live. This survival of fittest is not true. If that was the case, Jesus would have saved his life, his physical existence. He knew the spirit is more important. And the more you live in the spirit, the more you evolve yourself. And the more you evolve, the more other people around you evolve. And this chain reaction only can create a better world, not these social sciences. So that yoga tells us that the more you lift yourself from this animal existence and stop glorifying the social animal in you and you become divine, manifest this divinity within, the more evolved you will be, and the more evolved the environment around you will be. They will take inspiration from the yogis and the wonderful people of the world. They will be inspiration for creating a better world on that. That's the only way, not by practicing the social science. No rule of law, no parliamentary laws will make a human being great and good. Swamiji said that. He said no laws can force you. Police will be there, the legal system will be there, but there will be some efforts if one's greed is there to bypass these laws, to bypass these rules, and have our way to aggrandize one's own self, one's own ego, to satisfy one's own physical cravings. So this is what animals do. They don't seem to obey law. Though there is a law, there is a jungle law even in the jungle. They try to maintain it as far as possible, but when they are hungry, they kill each other. They don't believe, because that is the necessity for when you live at the gross level. The only way to solve this problem and live harmoniously with each other is to follow the spiritual path and evolve yourself and give more importance to the higher levels of existences, that is the Vijnanamaya Kosha and the Anandamaya Kosha, as I told you. And this is attained by Pratyahara, bringing the senses under the control of the will. Now, this is a very, very important aspect of yoga, for which all the 4 steps preceding it are there. It is for Pratyahara that asana, yama, niyama and all the social order, social sciences, no doubt they are necessary. Yama and niyama are nothing but social sciences. They are useful insofar as they allow you to have a healthy body and a healthy mind, healthy prana, which enables you to focus your attention on higher levels of personality. That's the only function of all the social sciences, of all the yama and niyama. Social sciences are based on yama and niyama, the different do's and the different commandments and the different rules which have been laid down by the scripture, which we follow, are nothing but these yamas and niyamas. So these are all preparatory steps to make us slightly better than these animals and make us fit to evolve into true human beings and divine beings, not just human beings. So that is when the evolution becomes complete. And that is how you transcend the limitations of the body and the mind and the prana by focusing more and more on higher levels of our personality. And that is known as Pratyahara, and that is where the willpower takes the willpower, which is sharpened by meditation, which is sharpened by pranayama, which is sharpened by the development of the buddhi. Buddhi is nothing but a refined will. The will which tells you what to do, what not to do, voluntarily, not because of the fear of the police or fear of society. It spontaneously gives you the right guidance regarding what to do, what not to do. It tells you why you should be unselfish, why should you not grab others' property, why should you not deprive others of, why should you practice ahimsa, why should you practice non-stealing. All these virtues have meaning only if you have a higher goal in mind. So that Pratyahara, bringing under the control of the will by a refined buddhi, which is part of the Vijnanamaya Kosha, we perform the 5th step of yoga, which is known as Pratyahara, before even we start Dhyana, Dharana. Then fixing the mind on the lotus of the heart. Kurma Purana believes in the lotus of the heart, the imaginary lotus. It's definitely imaginary, but the Tantra says that yogis have seen these lotuses. But whether we see them or not, we have to imagine. So, meditating or fixing the mind on the lotus of the heart or on the center of the head is what is called as dharana. So, there are different meditations, but the most popular one is meditating the center of the heart, because that is where you connect yourself, connect your Annamaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha and Manomaya Kosha to the Buddhi. So the Buddhi is awakened in the heart center. first and then it rises up. But that kind of dharana, which you find easy to practice after practicing pratyahara for a long time, is known as dharana, and this dharana helps you to go to the next step, which is dhyana. Limited to one spot, making that spot the base. Now, Kurma Purana says, why is it necessary to meditate in the heart center? Because that will become the base. Now, this once you make that spot the base, a particular kind of mental wave rises. These are not swallowed up by other kinds of waves, but by degrees will become prominent, while all others recede and finally disappear. Now, the idea of focusing on this particular center is to generate a particular kind of wave or a set of waves, constant repetition by mantra and by japa, which overpower all your other waves by degrees, which are right now troubling you. Most of our trouble is because of the mind. We are not able to control the different useless thoughts that come as and trouble us. The thoughts of depression, the thoughts of greed, jealousy, and all the qualities which animals have, which a lower human being has, continue to give us trouble. But the very purpose of this dharana is to make a certain kind of wave so powerful that it overpowers the other waves. By degrees, it is not immediate. By degrees, the other waves, they don't just die away, they become weaker and weaker and weaker. Because when you focus on the prominent waves which you are creating by the result of your sadhana, the other waves which normally rose without your being conscious of them, the waves are not brought into our consideration by our will. It just bubbles up. It requires will to stop them and to focus on something else. So it requires the will to do pratyahara, and that will is a result of meditation or dharana. When you focus the mind, one kind of mental waves rises which overpowers all the other waves. It's like an ocean. In the ocean, a big wave will come and completely destroy all the small waves and flatten the whole thing. And then you come to the shore, you will find a last big wave comes and flattens all the small waves before it, and then you'll see completely smooth water. So also, by degrees, these smaller waves will be gobbled up by your most prominent wave, which is there in the, which you have forcibly generated by focusing in your heart center. It doesn't come by itself. The meditation or the japa doesn't happen by itself unless you are an adept, unless it has become natural to you. It has to be forced again and again. This big wave has to be created, and that is the only way you can gobble up these smaller waves. And when that happens, that is why the Holy Mother said the easiest and the best way to solve the problems of life is to take the name of your God or your Ishta, Sri Ram Krishna, in silence. So first of all, when you practice silence, if it is a real silence, not just a temporary or an artificial silence, if it is a real internal silence, then your pratyahara, you are an adept in pratyahara, and then you can focus on dharana, you can focus on the mantra, and that repetition makes one kind of wave very powerful because of the successive nature of repetition. Japat Siddhi, repetition of the japa is the way to success. There's a huge science behind it. It's not as simple as it appears. That's why this yoga again and again talk about these restraint and all this. They are not just moral guidelines for us. People think, what is wrong in expressing ourselves? Everybody wants freedom. Why can I not express ourselves? That is what young people think. Freedom to express. But freedom not to express, nobody thinks of it. It is freedom not to express and not to give away to our animal instinct, evolves us as human beings and evolves us as divine beings. The divinity can come out only if we restrain ourselves. The power of restraining, which gives rise to willpower, which gives rise to pratyahara, which gives rise to a particular kind of mental wave with the help of our japa, our ishta, our guru's mantra. That is the secret of Raj Yoga. If that is understood, then only the next steps, dhyana and other things can be understood. While all the others recede and finally disappear. Next, the multiplicity of these waves gives place to unity and only one wave is left in the mind. This is known as dhyana or meditation. When we come to meditation, we come to a state where these multiple waves are subsumed or consumed by that one single wave of repetition of mantra. Though when we repeat it, there are many mantras. We repeat one mantra, we repeat another mantra, we repeat other mantra. But when you constantly repeat it, Kurma Purana says the multiplicity of these waves, japa, they disappear and they give rise to unity, and one big wave is left in the mind, that is dhyana. So, as a result of continuous japa, when the multiple similar waves, the similar positive waves of the Ishta, when they become predominant in your mind, when they become prominent in your mind, they coalesce to form one big wave. And that wave, if you are able to have, if your mind or if you're able to attain that state, then it is known as dhyana. So real meditation is having this one wave which has subsumed or consumed all the smaller waves, and also combine all these singularly positive waves of the Ishta into one big wave. And when that happens, dhyana happens. And then finally, when no basis is necessary, even that wave disappears. The whole of mind has become one wave, one formedness. It is called samadhi. Bereft of all help from places and centers, the only meaning of thought is present. If the mind can be fixed on the center for 12 seconds, it is technically known as dharana. 12 such dharanas will become a dhyana. That means 144 seconds. If that dharana persists, dharana itself is difficult, but if dharana persists for 144 seconds, it will be dhyana. For 12 seconds, if you hold on to one thought, one wave, it itself is dharana. That itself is difficult. So 144 seconds, if no other thought comes, it becomes dhyana. And 12 such dhyanas, 144 into 12, can you imagine how long? That will result in samadhi. So progressively you proceed from pratyahara to dharana. When you do it for 12 seconds, when all the smaller waves have been subsumed under that one big wave, and that wave lasts for 12 seconds, then it becomes dharana. Then you do 12 such dharanas, still the mind remains the same, then it is dhyana. That is 144. And 144 into 12, so that's a huge number. When that happens, that means your dhyana is so perfect. It is 12 times as powerful as one dhyana. Then that multiple of 12 gives rise to samadhi. So people who go into samadhi, any kind of samadhi, will exhibit this particular characteristic. That is what Kurma Purana says. So I shall conclude now. If there are some questions, you can ask. Yes. You can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Namaskar, Maharaj.
Namaste.
Namaste. How sometimes when one thinks they're acting from the buddhi or the Vijnanamaya kosha, but they might be acting from the man or the Manomaya kosha.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
how do we know that we're not deluding ourselves and it's the mind and we actually are from a place of intellect?
Yeah, it keeps vibrating. And not that you can act only from the Vijnanamaya kosha. It's always I mean, you change levels very often. Just as you go from the first floor to the top floor, then go down and go up and go down. You may come even to the Annamaya kosha. Why only Manomaya kosha? When the body comes, in spite of having stayed for some time during meditation, you sometimes one has a tendency to become ridiculous and behave in a strange way when it comes down far too low to the Annamaya kosha, not just the Manomaya kosha. Manomaya kosha, it is natural. That's why after meditation, people are advised to do some good reading or do some stotra part or something, so that the mind does not suddenly go down to the Annamaya or Pranamaya level. Though they are necessary, but they do not become prominently attached to their body. So that's why they say after meditation, it is just not bad. Manomaya kosha by itself is not bad. But once the Vijnanamaya kosha tells you what to think, how to think, what are the good things, what are the bad things, then there's no problem in coming back to the Manomaya kosha and staying there as long as you don't harm yourself. Even Annamaya kosha, we are always in the Annamaya kosha and the Pranamaya kosha. How properly we make use of it to evolve ourselves is the main problem. Not that we continue to live in the Annamaya. We live in the Annamaya kosha. How can you live without the body? How can you live without the prana? How can you live without the mind? There's nothing wrong. But only thing is, we have to learn to live in these three koshas in such a way that we evolve into higher and higher beings and are able to live in the Vijnanamaya kosha with buddhi, with wisdom, and also with bliss, with joy, with peace in our day to day life. So, you will know by the amount of joy you get. If you come down to the Manomaya kosha, then you will find confusion, you will find ignorance. You yourself will know that something is wrong. But if you are in the Vijnanamaya kosha, your intellect will be refined, your goal will be clear, your options or your attitudes or your focus and everything will improve. And the first sign of that is total peace, peace of mind. Peace of mind is something which is a very good uh, sign or guidepost when we are traveling on this journey. Okay?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Happy Diwali, Hariom.
Yes,
Thank you.
happy Diwali. Same to you. Wish you all a very happy Diwali, and also we celebrate Krishna Chaturdashi as Kali Puja, the Chaturdashi of that is tomorrow, Saturday, according to some calendars. So, wish all of you a very happy Diwali. If there is some question, Ravi wants to ask something, I believe. Ravi has sent something in the chat. What advice can you give to me to continue with japa and dharana when I am not well or have a headache or when it is difficult to do so? Yes, this is a very good question. It is something which affects us all. It's not just a question for you. It's a very, very important, though a very simple, but a very uh, pertinent question. When there is a headache, when these things are headache, uneasiness, sickness, these are all because of imbalance of prana and the Annamaya kosha and the Pranamaya kosha. Anything that disturbs either the Pranamaya kosha or the Manomaya kosha or even the Annamaya Kosha, the Pranamaya Kosha, and the Manomaya Kosha, results in some kind of imbalance which gives rise either to headache, which is a physical expression of that, worry, anxiety, tension, which also can lead to headaches. Sometimes too much of anxiety, too much of restlessness, too much of thinking. Apparently, too much of thinking should not give if it is a positive thought. But sometimes our thinking goes so round and round and round, even good thoughts, as it happened in the case of that philosopher in the gospel. The philosopher in the gospel committed suicide not because he was unhappy. Perhaps he was rich, he was well settled, he had a good family, who knows. But his obsession in trying to find a solution mentally took him round and round and round. He was not able to get a satisfactory answer. He did not know how to handle his restlessness. And that restlessness gave rise to anxiety, worry, and he finally committed suicide. Apparently, he was not unhappy the way people are unhappy. Some people are unhappy because of the compulsions of the world, because some external trouble which are not apparently not under their control. If that happens and one commits suicide, it is okay. I mean, you can't really blame such people because they are suffering. The Annamaya Kosha is suffering, the Pranamaya Kosha is suffering. Maybe it is their own fault, but still. But suffering because you don't get a satisfactory answer to your stupid academic pursuits. You go round and round, and then you create problem for yourself in the name of intellectual development, academic development, and you don't get satisfaction because you are looking for something in the wrong place. That is what Vedanta tells you. It is like searching for a pin in a haystack. The infinite number of thoughts you are capable of, and you try to find some unity and try to find one singular wave which this Kurma Purana speaks of, which gobbles up all the other waves. You can't find it because you are creating more and more waves. You are trying to create more and more activity for yourself. You are trying to create more and more occupations for yourself, and results in more and more waves that gives rise to anxiety, that gives rise to restlessness. Apparently, your Pranamaya Kosha is fine, Annamaya Kosha health is fine, everything is all right except the mind. And that mind gives rise to anxiety, that mind gives rise to headache, which is psychosomatic. It's not the wrong food or the wrong habits or the misuse of prana is not the only cause. It is the diarrhea of the mind as it is normally known. We have diarrhea because of consuming wrong kinds of food. Everybody knows that. It's the physical diarrhea. But there is also a thing which is known as diarrhea of the mind. So we are not well equipped to deal with that diarrhea. And that diarrhea gives rise to a different kind of illness. So, first one has to find out, your question was how to deal with that, how to meditate. It's a very good question because the cause has to be found. That's why Pratyahara is encouraged. The only way, there are no two ways. Not only according to yoga, but according to all spiritual masters, they all come to only one conclusion. There is no other way, absolutely no other way, other than to have this singular thought wave. This singular mind, this singular wave of the mind, which can be induced by prayer, by any of these yogas. You give it for different names. You call it Karma Yoga, you call it Raj Yoga, you call it any yoga. But the principle is the same. To create one big wave, mental wave, which subsumes all the smaller waves which are giving you this restlessness. And when that happens, then alone and then only you get peace. And then that is the only solution. There cannot be two solutions. So when Mother said the easiest and the best way, we have to listen. There is a reason why these saints, these great personalities keep repeating the same simple thing. Apparently it is simple, but it is not simple because we don't get faith in these teachings. That faith is difficult. Teaching is very simple, but it is difficult to have that faith. Once you have that faith, then you go to the solution. It's not only the easiest but the best way. There's no other way. In fact, Holy Mother could have said, and she said it in some places, that is the only way. Not only it is the easiest, not only is it the best, but it is the only way. Because yoga says there are no other ways to solve the restlessness of the mind, of the manomaya kosha, of the pranamaya kosha and the annamaya kosha. Otherwise it will be a futile effort. We go on round and round. So what Ravi has asked, how to solve the smaller problems. The problem may be very small. It may be just an headache. It may be just a anxiety. But you have to tackle it the same way. For big problems or all the problems. See, Holy Mother repeats the easiest and the best way to solve all the problems. She is not saying that if it's a big problem, you do japa. If it is a small problem, you solve it in some other way. No, there cannot be two solutions. There is only one solution. Whether you read the Gita, whether you read the Upanishad, it is somehow create one singular thought. Do it either by japa, do it either by repeating the Upanishadic verses, do it by karma, do it by whatever method you can. But the end result should be one singular wave which is of a permanent nature, and it helps if you have that singular wave as which is a name of your Ishta, who is complete, who is peaceful, who is all glorious, who is all peace, who is strong, who gives you strength, who gives you security. So all these positive things put together is your conception of God or Ishta. Whether you believe in a personal God, whether you believe in the Upanishadic Brahman, or whether you believe in the Father in heaven, whatever you believe in one thing that is a combination of all the solutions to your problem. There's only one solution: to hold on to Him. To see that it consumes, not just holding on to Him and holding on to other things as well. Because the smaller, we have to ascertain or make sure that these smaller things are consumed by this bigger thought. That is what yoga says. The mind can be fixed for 12 seconds doing dharana. You bring it from places where it should not be going, subsume it, minimize those thoughts, do it by pratyahara. Pratyahara teaches you how to minimize the irrelevant and insignificant and trivial thoughts which engage you. Once you have done that, for 12 seconds you practice dharana. 12 seconds. Then that is so difficult to make sure that for 12 seconds no other thought comes to your mind except that of your Ishta. You try, it's not a joke. To try and hold on to the japa for 12 seconds is not a joke. Let me repeat it again. Once that dharana comes, to hold that thought for 144 seconds, you can imagine what you will start sweating. He says you will have quivers in your body. It's not just quivers. Your whole body will be shaking if you strain so much so as to have this dharana for 144 seconds. This one singular thought for 144 seconds, it's very easy to say, but it is so difficult to practice. So that is why one should know that this yoga is a really serious stuff. It has nothing to do with organized religion. It has nothing to do with our rituals that we do. They are all kindergarten of religion. Yoga takes you directly to reality, solves your problem, and takes you face to face with divinity. It does not offer piecemeal solutions. There are other ways in which how we can minimize. The rituals were designed to minimize your other thoughts. Instead of going after the world, you go after, do some puja, and that puja helps you to fix your mind to certain rituals, maybe 10, 15, 20. But if you go on adding rituals and have a huge paraphernalia of puja, then your mind gets engaged in all those things. But definitely it serves one purpose. During the time of the puja, at least you don't stray away and put your mind and generate stupid thoughts. That is why puja and all this ritualistic worship, however distracting it may be, they are advised because our mind is so very restless. Instead of 1000 thoughts, it will be restricted to at least 12 or 13 thoughts which you have to do. Either you will offer flowers, you will be offering some mantra, you will offer some water, all the rituals. More and more rituals were created because if you just have one ritual, say tell somebody, you just do japa, you don't have to do anything. He will become restless, he will leave that place, he cannot sit for 5 minutes. Because 144 seconds itself is impossible with one thought. So then our Shastras said, okay, don't stick to one particular thought. You just take 5 or 10 thoughts and do puja. You feed the Ishta, you give water to the Ishta, give flowers to the Ishta, direct all your sense organs, fragrant flowers, fragrant incense sticks. So smell, all the organs are focused and directed towards, even if you don't have one thought, you have 50 thoughts, but all those thoughts are around the one thought of your Ishta. So there is a God whom you are worshipping, an Ishta, and though this ritual is a basic thing, it is a very useful thing. Because Sri Ramakrishna got all his samadhi and all those things by this puja only. But it was a real puja. He did not sit for puja and think about his bank balances and other things. When he did puja, he was behaving as if he is feeding mother. He is dressing mother. He is offering incense to mother. So everything was circulating around that one thought. We come to the same point again. What we attain through japa, we are attaining through puja. But sitting in the puja room, if you think about many hundred things, about other people, about other things, your otherworldly problems, sitting in front of Thakur, then the purpose is not served. The puja which you are doing, the rituals which are doing, has not served the purpose of reducing the number of thoughts. So when that doesn't happen, the puja becomes meaningless. The ritual becomes meaningless. But if it helps, if the puja helps to focus your mind and take you to yoga and makes you silent, makes you do dharana for 12 seconds, 144 seconds if you do it, you come to dhyana, and then if it goes further, which happened in the case of Thakur, one might as well get samadhi. But it will be a great achievement if we can do it for 144 seconds at least, at a time. You see, dhyana means you stick to a thought and do that dharana for 12 times. Dharana itself is difficult for 12 seconds. Not allowing a single thought or a single wave to come for 12 seconds. When you do it for 144 seconds, which is, I repeat, which is not a joke, not allowing any thought to come, bubble up. So much pratyahara, so much dharana you have done that you are not allowing a single thought to come up for 144 seconds. If one can attain, it becomes dhyana. So this is the way, Ravi. Maybe it's a very big answer. To make it more simple, especially for sadhakas who have the japa, the easiest and the best way is to repeat japa with the idea that this should be the prominent thought in my life. This should be the overpowering thought which will reduce the other thoughts, reduce my anxieties, reduce my worries, which will take care of our headaches, whether it is physical headache or a mental headache, however it may be induced. All the restlessness, all the problems of the body, mind and prana will be subsumed by this one overpowering thought of japa, if you can do it. I think that is the best solution. Okay. So we are already taken 24 minutes. I wish everybody a very happy Diwali. And tomorrow, as usual, we will be having the Gospel of Holy Mother. We don't have a Gita class, but it will not be on Zoom. It will be on Cisco WebEx, because only if it is university, if the university organizes, it will be on Zoom. But on all other Saturdays, the timing will be the same. We will meet at 4:45. We don't want to change the time on Saturday. Instead of 4:30, it is 4:45. We'll discuss the Gospel of Holy Mother. It is very important because tomorrow is Kali Puja, and Holy Mother Sharda Devi herself is an incarnation of Kali, if you may say so, and also Sri Ram Krishna. They are manifestations of the Divine Mother, the male and the female aspect. They are the same, two obverse and reverse of the same coin. So, whether you discuss about Kali Puja or you discuss about Holy Mother, who is the essence of that Kali, it is the same. And I hope tomorrow all of you will be present. It's a very auspicious day, on the day of Kali Puja at 4:45 p.m. tomorrow, the Greenwich Mean Time. Thank you. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.